So, today we're going to dive into a pretty radical rethinking of our final journey. It comes from the really groundbreaking work of Stanislav Grof and Joan Halifax, whose book, The Human Encounter with Death, basically challenged everything we in the West thought we knew about mortality. Okay, let's get into it.
You know, this whole exploration really boils down to one huge philosophical question. Is death just a final, absolute end? A brick wall that our consciousness just smacks into, and that's it? Game over? Or could it be something else? A transition, maybe. A doorway into a different kind of existence. That one question is the frame for everything we're about to talk about.
First things first, we've got to understand the problem that Grof and Halifax were even looking at. Our modern culture has, for the most part, built this massive wall around the idea of death, and that wall is built out of fear and, frankly, a lot of denial.
What's so wild about this is how deeply it's ingrained in us. It's like, if life is this big game we're all trying to win, then death is the ultimate loss, right? The source material makes this really powerful point, that we often treat a dying person like a loser in that game, someone who reminds us that we can't control everything.
And look, this way of thinking has some pretty serious consequences. The dominant view is basically materialistic. Your consciousness is just a side effect of your brain chemistry. When the brain stops, you stop. That kind of belief creates this incredible psychological suffering, because if this life is all you've got, then the end of it is a total catastrophe. It's something you have to fight and deny until the very last second, instead of something you might actually prepare for.
So if you've got this massive cultural wall of fear, how do you even begin to take it down? Well, the key, as it turned out, came from a super unexpected and, let's be honest, a very controversial place: psychedelic research with people who were terminally ill.
Now, let's be super clear here. This was not about people just trying to escape reality. The whole point of this therapy was to use these substances in a really controlled, safe setting to help people face their deepest fears head-on. It was about opening a door to psychological exploration right on the threshold of death itself.
And what they started seeing was just astonishing. Even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a total pioneer in studying death, noted that these weren't just random drug trips. Patients were reporting these incredibly powerful, structured, and deeply meaningful journeys. Experiences of symbolic death and rebirth that completely changed their perspective.
And this is the really critical takeaway, right? The researchers figured out pretty quickly that they were witnessing something way deeper than just a chemical reaction in the brain. The experiences had a pattern, a structure. It looked a lot less like a drug trip and a lot more like the kind of mystical initiations and rites of passage that you read about in ancient cultures.
Okay, so when you find something this big, you realize your old maps just don't work anymore. You need a new one. This led Stanislav Grof to develop a new cartography, a whole new map of the human mind that went way beyond what traditional psychology was talking about.
Grof basically proposed three main layers of our unconscious. First, there's the biographical level. That's familiar territory for us. It's your personal memories, your life story. But then you go deeper, to the perinatal level. And this is where it gets wild. It's a reliving of the intense struggle and release of your own birth, and it seems to act as a blueprint for the whole death-rebirth experience. And then, beyond even that, is the transpersonal. This is where consciousness just blows past the boundaries of you, the individual ego.
And to make this less abstract, let's look at a real story from the study. This is about Ted, a 26-year-old patient. During his session, he didn't just feel better about dying. His entire worldview shifted. He saw with his own eyes that death wasn't an endpoint, but just one part of this huge eternal cycle of transformation. So, this brings up the big question, right? Is this all just an effect of the drugs, an artifact of the therapy? Well, the research pointed to something else entirely, something that seems to be hardwired into all of us, into the human consciousness itself. And you know what? When they started looking around, they saw these exact same patterns popping up everywhere, not just in therapy, but in stories of near-death experiences, deep meditation, spontaneous mystical states, all happening without any substances at all. I mean, just look at the parallels here with what we call near-death experiences. The feeling of ego death in a session is so similar to an out-of-body sensation. That panoramic review of your life, it's almost identical to the famous life review. And the feelings of cosmic unity and transcending time, they map so closely onto encounters with a being of light. The core experience, it's the same.
And here's the kicker. This is not new, not even close. We, as a species, have been drawing maps for this inner world for literally thousands of years.
The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, ancient rites of passage, even our classic hero's journey myths, they all describe this exact same territory. This research wasn't inventing something new. It was like finding a modern key to a very, very ancient door.
So, what's the point of all this? What happens when you go on this journey of facing death symbolically or for real, and you come back? This is where this whole philosophy gets really personal.
The results were just life-altering. For the people who had these experiences, that paralyzing fear of death, it just plummeted. But it wasn't replaced with an empty void. Instead, they found this new, powerful sense of purpose. They often developed a deep conviction that consciousness was something much more than a biological accident. It gave them a brand new lens on life itself.
And this really is the philosophical heart of it all. It's the idea that death isn't the end of the line. It's a transition, a profound shift in consciousness. And for these people, it wasn't just a nice idea anymore. It wasn't a belief. They felt it. It became a lived reality for them.
You know, there's a quote from a monk way back in the 17th century that just nails this whole idea. The man who dies before he dies does not die when he dies. By going through a kind of symbolic death, facing your own mortality, letting your ego dissolve, before your body gives out, you can completely transform your relationship with that final moment. You can strip away its terror.
And that leaves all of us with a pretty big question to chew on. The point of this work isn't to give us a definitive answer about what happens after we die. It's to profoundly reframe the question itself. It asks us to just consider, what if death isn't a wall? What if it is a doorway? How might we live differently right here and now if we learn to approach our own end, not with fear, but with curiosity?